G'day folks, just want to talk about mentoring plans, and I guess one of the critical things is for people that want to succeed or push their boundaries in relation to their skills and their knowledge, and try and develop themselves as a better worker, I guess you might say, or a better team member, or somebody who can commit to the group a little bit better. We need to give them support in doing that. So developing mentoring plans become critical in being able to offer some support to those people. Generally speaking, it's by somebody in a higher role or somebody of more experience. It might be an external stakeholder, whatever it might be, with a plan laid out in place that they get to understand that there's people there to support them, how those people are going to support them, not necessarily be there to make the decisions for them, but to empower them to be confident in the decisions and the skills that they're being able to achieve, the right skills to do the job. So typically mentoring is generally, I'm going to say it in very general terms, it's considered as a volunteer relationship where that experienced person supports the professional development of, I'm going to say the term, a less experienced person. Sometimes it's not necessarily the case. It could be one-on-one mentoring of two people at the same level, and a mentor is just offering advice in some situations, which typically we can call coaching. Do I get paid? Typically, if it's in a workplace, no. It's kind of assumed that if you're willing to take on that role, there's obviously no financial incentive for it anyway. So generally speaking, you can see the assets that somebody may have within a team, and you can also see that they may be a bit anxious or a bit not confident about where they're heading to or how they're going to do it. And you can offer some advice on, getting them from point A to point B. But to do that, you realistically need a plan. It could be as simple as something just written down on paper, or it could be something more well established. So how does it generally occur? I mean, like I've just stated there, that sometimes it can just be one person noticing that somebody has a particular set of traits that might work for the group or the team, or it can be I'm going to use the term more forced, where people are basically, they come onto site and they're dedicated a mentor at the start to assist them in understanding the way that the business works or the way that the team works. And in those situations, we can sometimes come into, there's a few barriers, and we'll talk about some barriers later on anyway. So the planning is critical. Realistically, it's critical in the professional setting so that each party knows the outcomes. So point A to point B, we need to know how to get there. And it's not as simple as just going, all right, here, just go off and we'll get you there. That's going to lead you down the garden path, and you'll end up in a series of swings and roundabouts, pretty much. So the idea about the planning is it gives the mentee the confidence to approach their mentor where they need to. It might be scheduled, it might be, just ad hoc, where the mentor just makes themselves available in times of urgency. So who is the mentor? The best way to describe a mentor is a person offering their professional support to a mentee. And the mentee is the person who is working on their development with the support of the mentor. So, where to from here? We need to basically understand who the mentor, mentee is, how the relationship's going to roll out, and to do that, the development of the plan is pretty damn critical in enabling both parties to be clear on their perspective and their goals. So to do that, we should sit down in a team meeting or a group or whatever it might be and look to perform a skills analysis. So trying to figure out where we've got gaps in our skills, and it could even be knowledge. We could even put knowledge in there as well, because sometimes knowledge doesn't translate across to skill, so that we can offer support or direction in that training. So there's no sense training someone or offering support in an area where they're already quite strong, and they may naturally just develop that level of progression from the level they're at to the level where they need to get to without even really knowing it. So it's pretty critical that we basically identify the skills gaps and maybe work on the weak points, using weak as a not so bad term. Alright, so depicting a hierarchy and reporting lines is really critical in enabling the mentor and the mentee to sort of say, this is where I am. I might not necessarily be in your direct line of reporting, so don't come to me and start basically trying to report to me the things that are happening at a lower level, for instance, when you've actually got a line manager to talk to. So the mentor and the mentee, where they're in a relationship that's separate to the lines of reporting, it should just strictly be that support role more so than a reporting role. So in the plan, that really should be developed or laid out in some way, shape or form to show you the mentee, particularly where they actually sit within the plan and within the business or the group. Setting the realistic milestones for the mentee, and sometimes there might even be a mentor set of milestones in there as well. Quite often you see mentors being mentored, and some of their mentoring milestones might basically be embedded inside some of those plans, but hopefully they're independent. They're not going to be something that impact on the way that the mentee is going to be mentored. So set milestones, and those milestones might be as simple as get your forklift ticket, or we need to get you into some Microsoft Excel training and get you competent in understanding Microsoft spreadsheeting and things like that. Milestones can be pretty what's the word for it, generalised in some points. From those milestones, we really should seek to establish them as key performance indicators, so we've got a real good line of sight. If I don't achieve this, what do I need to do to achieve it, and is that going to impact on the next level of training that I might need to do, or to the next phase? Am I going to be restricted in job opportunities or job advancements within this group? So those key performance indicators can sometimes, they're not about penalising people most of the time, unless you're in a business performance context. This is about mentoring, not so much business performance. So they realistically point out the strengths and the weaknesses within the program and maybe help to advance that program down the line. Obviously we need to be sure that at the start we're well aware of the risks that might occur within the program, and we'll talk about the risks in a little bit more context later on. But if we just go into it assuming that everything's going to be hunky-dory, we're going to be setting ourselves up for some pain down the line. So the skills audit process. Alright, it might have occurred in an interview or a pre-recruitment process, and we may even have put some scores against that, so 1 out of 10 for a particular thing or a 10 out of 10 for another thing. Sometimes those sorts of summative assessments are really made right back at the start, depending on your HR department. When we're talking about your skills audit, and we're going to pick it up in the pre-recruitment or the interview process as well, but if you've been on site for quite a while and you actually already are an existing employee who's looking to be mentored, be clear about your strengths and your weaknesses. So don't hide anything that you might think is going to hold you back, because that is just going to give you a big gap. You're going to eventually get to the point where you're going to hit a roadblock, and your plan's not going to be able to cope with that. So we need our plan to be pretty much robust, and finding out the strengths and the weaknesses for somebody is really important to do that, because we can sometimes leverage off those strengths to support the development of a weakness. I can't think of anything immediately right now, but there is plenty of them. And don't just address them and say, right, cool, that's what we need to do. Make sure that the plan documents the skills and the knowledge gaps. So you might even do a SWOT analysis, or a portion of a SWOT analysis where you do your strengths and weaks and put them down onto the table, and then go from there. So generally speaking, your strengths should be used, as I've said a minute ago, to support the development of your weaknesses. So the skills assessment itself isn't about limiting access or control, in like, not saying you can't do that because you're not qualified or you don't know how to do that, or it's more so about getting the support at ground level to develop a more robust program for that mentoring relationship. So both of you have a clear path forward so that you understand exactly where we might hit a barrier, so that we can plan to get over that barrier with, it might just be a simple bit of mentoring, or it might be, all right, your mentoring plan says that we need to offer some training, for instance. And training itself doesn't have to be on site or internal or from the mentor directly. Sometimes it can be inefficient to do that because the mentor is obviously doing it voluntarily, so they'll obviously be impacting on their own work role or their own tasks that they need to do in a day if they were the one to do all the training. So sometimes we use external training requirements rather than internal process training. So the difference between the two would be an external training requirement might be to get accredited training to upskill on new or existing technology. There might be some existing technology that we need to develop the skills in a group of people, let alone just the mentee, to integrate that technology into a project. There might be licensing requirements that the mentee needs to perform particular duties. So, for instance, a high risk ticket or a forklift ticket or working from heights platform tickets, things like that. Internal process is more likely to be training or informing the mentee about the policies and the internet structures, the information technology, so like the ways that the computer systems work and the way that the filing works, and evacuation drills and all that. It sounds pretty silly, but that internal process is more about training according to strict workplace or group related policies rather than, all right, there's some external accredited training that's going to offer you. And normally in that internal process we would have something like a standard operating procedure or standardised procedures. They've got heaps of different names, but those standard operating procedures are normally something that's the mentee can refer to on a regular basis to support their training or their own progression from point A to point B. Rewards. What we really should be careful of is the way that we use our system to reward people. What we don't want to do is to hold off on really critical training that's going to enable the person to progress. So if we were to say, righto, you need to get from point A to point B, but we're not going to give you any additional training until you get to point B, and then we offer you the training, that would be really silly. So it'd probably be unsafe of us and non-compliant in many situations as well. So use the reward process to offer an incentive to maybe support their desires, I think is probably the word we really should be using there. So they might not need that reward to make them a better worker or in the context of their immediate workplace, but it might be a reward to give them, to support them to move on to another role, even if it was two or 3 years down the track. So showing somebody a path beyond where they were going to be at point B is also pretty critical, and that's where those rewards can come in to that process. So we spoke about hierarchy before, and basically all hierarchy is understanding the pecking order. Who's above me that I need to report to that might get in trouble if I do my job wrong, or who do I report to if something goes wrong at this level? Who do I report to if I need some support? and generally this is probably what we would call a dendrogram, where we can see at the top here we've got this is the Google company hierarchy, which you can imagine would be pretty hideous in terms of trying to understand where you fit. If you didn't have one of these, you'd be really struggling to understand who the hell everybody was. So generally speaking, if we looked at the company level stuff, so the board of directors, we've got the chairman, down to the president, vice chairman, CEO, so on and so forth, all the way till we get to the administrative head, who probably knocks out information across to the operations and the executive. But as a mentee, you're quite likely to be probably sitting down the bottom. So as a trainee potentially, and don't get me wrong, people even up at this level can still be mentored by people. So it's still really critical if we're looking at an internal mentoring program, that if the trainee sits over here and he's mentored by a chief marketing officer for some reason, that the trainee's not directly talking to the chief marketing officer about operational issues within inside their group. So it's quite likely that the next person up is the one that the trainee should be reporting to. So the technology associate, rather than trying to jump around and cause issues with infighting, I guess you might say. If you start doing that, you end up with people going, right, he's not reporting to me, he's reporting to someone that he shouldn't be reporting to, and he's going over my head. So just be aware that these hierarchies are really important in people understanding where they actually fit within the group. So we spoke about setting some milestones or goals. Typically a milestone is something realistically we use to achieve a goal. But in this situation we can just use the SMART principle to set goals so that the mentee and potentially the mentor know exactly that what we've agreed to is achievable by our standards. And when I say achievable, we really want it to be something that, say for instance, you yourself, you wouldn't go out and say, I want to be President of the United States in 2 years. Or you wouldn't want to be the CEO of Fisheries WA in 12 months. It's just something that you're not going to achieve. You're better off setting small milestones to get to that goal over time. So, specific goals. So we realistically want to set something to make sure that you give complete direction to that goal. Don't just say you need to get training. Alright? Dedicate the time to look at the types of training that suit, alright, and directly refer to it in your plan. So if you find that you've got a weakness in being able to manage people on the ground, where we might need some leadership and might need some technical support and whatever it might be, we might say, alright, you need to complete a diploma or a certificate for, or whatever it might be, in frontline management, rather than just saying you need some training. So be specific in what you say. Don't just say you need training to drive that car. You might say, righto, or that truck, you need a license. You need to achieve a license to drive that car. We really need to be able to measure our outcomes, and sometimes it can be difficult to plan those. So we need to get it right so that the mentee knows the ultimate measure and how to achieve it. So, for instance, in our frontline management we just spoke about a couple of seconds ago, if we were to say the specific goal was to achieve the frontline management certificate, how long is it going to take me to get there? Alright, so in this case we're actually going to use we're going to use one measure to cover off on two things. So we might say that the measurable outcome is that the ticket is achieved within 12 months. Alright, is that a realistic outcome, or is it achievable? I would say it is for most people. You've got professionals guiding you along the way, including your mentor, who's probably got that same certificate or something similar to it. Might be a higher level, or just got the experience to be able to understand it. So don't set those unrealistic or unachievable goals. Make sure that the mentee is agreeing to it and comfortable with the way that it is, but make sure that it's a challenge. Don't set it something that's too easy. okay, let's just get you a certificate for in frontline management, and let's let you take 2 or 3 years to do it, because that's just not challenging enough to most people. And if you set those really open goals, people become complacent, and they just, they really lose interest, and they're not driven to actually achieve. So don't ever hesitate to set something that's quite challenging but realistic and achievable at the same time, and make sure that it's time constrained so that people know what they need to achieve by when, so that we're not just sitting back going, oh crap, I've got to study at the last minute, I've got to get this in. How many times have you seen somebody study at the last minute and only just scrape through the line or over the mark or whatever it might be? It's not really conducive to really high quality outcomes, leaving something to the last minute. So if we look over here at this little box, we can see that what specifically do you want to do? Your measure is how will you know when you've achieved it. So over here we were specific in saying that we want a frontline management diploma. The completion of that diploma is the measure. Is it achievable or attainable? Is it realistic? I think it is. And we set a 12-month time limit on it, so that we've actually sort of set something up to enable somebody to work better as a leader, for instance, within that group or within that team, whatever it might be. Where to next? Key performance. Many people have probably seen key performance indicators before, not really ever seen, not really understood the way that they work. For instance, your attendance at work is generally a key performance indicator. Sometimes the amount of work you put out is a key performance indicator. The level of the work that you put out might be a key performance indicator. There's many ways that we can measure key performance. But like I said in the earlier stages of this presentation, in this situation, we're not sort of using these key performance indicators to penalise people. Mentoring relationships about gaining confidence and promoting people to understand that they actually fit within a team and can contribute. So don't use your key performance indicators as a penalising mechanism. They're more about addressing where the program or this mentoring plan needs to make its next progressions or its next set of reviews or whatever it might be. So set your key performance indicators directly off your SMART goals. That would be the way that I would do it. So for instance, your team needs to complete a comms strategy by the end of the month. Alright, so you've been given a month to complete a strategy. Doesn't say how much of the strategy or how many pages or anything like that, because if we were to say, alright, it has to be 100 pages of a comms strategy, and you'd be sitting there trying to fill in 100 pages of junk. So in that situation, it would be just like, complete me a strategy and complete it in a time of 2 months. Alright, so the key performance indicator would be the completion of that strategy, and the 2 months would be the other critical part of it. Using the performance indicators, it really it can be a bit of a, I'm going to use the term swings and roundabouts again. It can bring us back to the start. So from where we indicated that we had some gaps in our knowledge and our skills, and understood where some of the weaknesses are within the mentee, or maybe even the mentor, we come back to the start and we can redocument them, review it, and then push the barriers again on the next plan that you may lay down. So it might be you might not set a mentoring plan that's a year long. You might set one that's 2 or 3 years long with these review periods in it, where we come back to it annually to find out where we're actually sitting. In some places they call it my plan for success. So they basically sit, well, where have you ticked things off? Where do you need to achieve some more? And just keep this process of professional development occurring. So occasionally you're going to hit a stumbling block though, and you're going to find it very hard to measure a point, and particularly that might come down into personal satisfaction, for instance. It's really hard to measure personal satisfaction or professional satisfaction just by looking at someone. So you may have to invest in review surveys or something like that, where you've got some sort of metric that comes out of it, a score out of 100, and how do you feel out of 100. If you're sitting at 50, well, you might be pretty hard pressed to let that relationship evolve any further after that, or less than that. If I'm only 5% satisfied that my mentor is actually doing something for me, well, righto, well, we need to look at how that's going to work. So you may have to invest in some surveys. You may develop them yourselves. You might use some of the online survey mechanisms like SurveyMonkey, or there's hundreds of them anyway. So some innovative survey points anyway, and integrate those into your performance management system if you're finding it very hard to get a key performance indicator that is really valuable. So some of those things I just spoke about in that last slide were largely related to the risks that are involved in the mentoring plan. So being aware of those risks to that process or to your plan can, especially up front, addressing those risks up front can enable you to pick up where those risks are actually occurring, or when they're actually occurring. So if you didn't actually identify them back at the start as a risk, you might even just not even think about it. But if it's actually documented and you actually read it and you're actually aware of it, you can actually go, all right, well, that's just occurred. Let's look at how we can manage it. So some of the key risks might be a lack of knowledge from the mentor, poor motivation, or overall poor involvement from the mentor. Or we could have over-involvement from the mentor, where the mentor is basically not enabling you to work freely with the process that we sometimes call micromanaging. And some of these can occur from the mentee as well. So the mentee might be going back to the mentor and saying, that's not how you do it, this is how you're going to do it. And we've got a hell of a lot of risks involved in that, including the breakdown of the relationship, where to the point where we're, say, below 50% satisfaction from the mentor or the mentee. You might be looking, 50% of the time I'm okay, the other 50% of the time I'm actually not really happy at all. So it's really critical that we develop these risks, and then there might be a matrix that you develop that you put into the document that say this is how we're going to manage it. So if you get to the point where it's a 50% satisfaction rate, you might say that these are the controls that we put in place. It might be more meetings, it might be a better listening, active listening. There's plenty of things that might go into those matrices anyway. So just be aware of those risks up the front, document them in the plan, especially if they're things outside of the personal context. So a lack of funding to support the mentoring process might lead to a collapse in the mentoring process. There's no funding to offer training, or no funding to offer support to the mentor or the mentee. You might look at that, if that comes up right at the start, look at the funding and go, oh no, we haven't got the money to do that. Or you might just modify your mentoring plan to say, well, let's look at other ways that we can train somebody. It might be online, it might be training in place, for instance, which we've kind of addressed back at the start as normally internal process. But we could train in place, instead of just using training in place for processes, we might try and bring in some workplace training and assessment, for instance. A poorly developed mentoring culture, so some is a big risk. I don't know what's coming up here. Oh, I've said that, document the key risks. Identify the strategy how these can be avoided. Poorly developed mentoring culture is something that is starting to become a thing of the past. If a workplace isn't confident in supporting their employees to move forward and challenge themselves and so on and so forth, they're going to get a high turnover rate. Their KPIs are going to be off the charts in terms of their operational management, and the senior directors are going to be looking at it going, all right, cool, why are we turning over so much staff? And sometimes that's because a developed mentoring culture isn't there. And the other time is, if you've got a mentoring culture and it's not evenly spread across the group or the team or in the workplace, the people being mentored the mentees, can be sort of chastised and picked on by other people and maybe even bullied. So if the mentoring culture isn't embedded into the workplace, you may look at mentoring external to the workplace and, you know, making sure that it's not happening in front of everybody until you can pull the business into line and make it part of your culture, that mentoring is the way forward. So in the end, the plan itself is seeking to achieve a small document. It doesn't have to be 100 pages long. Something that we can spit out, that we can sign off on as a mentor and a mentee, and maybe even a workplace supervisor or something, to say that I'm happy for the mentor to discuss things with the mentee. We want that document to show that gap analysis. We want the goals to be developed with an action plan, so making the action plans just being that this is what we want to do, this is how we're going to do it. Basically that SMART card that I had up there on that slide earlier, if you break that down and put it into a table for each of your goals, you can put in there how you're going to achieve that goal, who's going to be responsible for maybe some of the training, what the measure is in there. Is it going to be 100% achievable rate, you know, an achievable rate of 70%? Do I turn up to work 1 out of 2 days? Whatever it might be, as long as we've got that time-bound relationship in there as well, to say it's going to happen in X amount of time. So that's, you can pretty much turn that little smart card into an action plan in something like Microsoft Excel, or you can make a chart on a whiteboard and take a photograph of it. Who the hell cares really, as long as there's something documented. The KPIs for those goals are identified. The comm strategy for the plan. How are we going to ensure that some of the milestones are met? Do we need to have a regular meeting? Is it the situation where you're not always in contact with your mentor, or the mentee and the mentor aren't always in contact? How are they going to contact each other when they're out of range? Is it Skype? Is it, I don't know, email? Is it via a video conference? Those strategies can be laid out in the plan, so that you don't have to scratch your head and go, oh, what am I going to do? I'm lost. I really need to speak to my mentor. And in reality, it comes down to the accessibility of the information from the mentor to the mentee, to make sure that the mentee is confident in what they're doing. That's really what mentoring is about. It's about boosting confidence and enabling somebody to potentially fill someone else's shoes and not jump up into that role and feel like they're drowning. So yeah, basically the communication strategy is really important inside that plan. It could even just be a list of contact details. For instance, contact me here when I'm out of range. You know, it could be contact this person to get me a message and I'll call you back, for instance. And we really need to have some sort of review strategy or an improvement section in there to say, righto, you've ticked off 5 out of 10 of these things, you're doing really well. That could be one of your KPIs as well. You've ticked off 5 out of 10 of your goals in 12 months. But the other 5, righto, cool, we've got to work on them, and we might slip in another couple of ones to help you improve on the other goals that you may have already achieved. So realistically, looking at this, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You may have a 5-page mentoring plan that you as the mentor, your mentee, and like I said, an external person, it might be somebody that's a manager or a supervisor, all sign off on it to say, righto, we're happy to conduct this mentoring plan, and let's meet when we need to meet.